The grand chamber of the Valaxy High Synod did not echo. It was designed to absorb sound, to swallow the descent of 1,000 worlds, and return only the polished silence of consensus. The room was a cavernous sphere of obsidian and bioluminescent veins, suspended in the gravitational null point of the station known as the apex. Here, the air tasted of ozone and ancient recycled oxygen, filtered through the respiratory systems of species that had ruled the galaxy for eons before the first primate on Terra had learned to strike flint against stone. High Counselor Vitara sat upon a dais raised high above the assembly, her compound eyes reflecting the shimmering light of the galactic map that floated in the center of the chamber. The map was a masterpiece of holographic art, a swirling vortex of claimed stars, trade routes, and exclusion zones. But the eyes of the assembly, representatives of the Krell warcastes, the fluidic shapers of the Omi, and the crystalline intellectuals of the Zil, were not fixed on the sprawling glory of the Federation. They were fixed with a mixture of derision and unease on a small, darkened sector on the fringes of the spiral arm, the exclusion zone, the cage of the Terrans. "The petition is absurd," General Krog of the Krell rumbled, his voice like grinding tectonic plates. He stood on the lower tier, his armored carapace twitching with irritation. "We are discussing the allocation of hyperlanes for the next orbital cycle, and yet once again the Student Council of the Apex Academy has submitted a formal grievance regarding the Terran ban. They claim it is an obstruction to academic freedom. They claim the humans are nothing more than a curiosity, a withered species kept in isolation out of archaic superstition. They mock the containment protocols." Vitara shifted her weight, her mandibles clicking softly. "The youth are always eager to open doors they cannot close, General. It is the nature of the unburdened to question the weight carried by their elders. But their ridicule is becoming problematic. There are reports of unauthorized attempts to breach the digital firewall surrounding the Terran habitat. They do not believe the history because we have sanitized it too well." "Then let them see," Krog scoffed, waving a massive, clawed hand. "Let them enter the habitat. Let them see the humans shuffling in their gardens, tending to their machines. The humans have not fired a weapon in 300 cycles. They are domesticated. The students are right in one regard. The humans are pathetic. The ban is a waste of resources. We maintain a blockade around a graveyard." A hush fell over the chamber, deeper than the dampening fields could account for. From the shadows of the diplomatic tier, a figure emerged. It was Counselor Xylo, a Zil whose body was a lattice of living crystal. Xylo did not speak often, but when he did, the resonance of his voice vibrated in the very bones of those present. "You mistake dormancy for death, General. You mistake the scabbard for the absence of a blade. The students ridicule the ban because they see a quiet neighbor and assume he is weak. They do not know that the quiet neighbor is quiet because he is listening to things we cannot hear. We did not ban the humans to keep them in. We banned them to keep ourselves safe from the contagion of their ideology, and more importantly, to keep them from realizing that we are no longer useful to them." "Philosophy," Krog spat. "The students demand access. They wish to interview the monsters of Saul. They wish to prove that the Great War of the Archives is a myth invented by the Synod to control information. I say we let them. Let the children poke the sleeping animal. When they find it is toothless and bald, perhaps they will return to their studies and stop wasting the Council's time." Vitara looked down at the map, at the tiny, red-bordered sphere of the Terran exclusion zone. She felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's climate control. She remembered the day the treaty was signed. She remembered the human admiral, a man of small stature and soft skin, who had signed the document not with the trembling hand of the defeated, but with the steady, indifferent hand of a parent indulging a tantruming child. "Very well," Vitara whispered, the sound amplified to fill the vast hall. "Issue a temporary variance. Allow the top-tier students of the Xenology track to enter the exclusion zone for a directed study, but warn them. Tell them that if they disrespect the inhabitants, the Synod will not intervene in the consequences." The decision rippled out from the High Synod, traveling through the data streams of the Apex Station, down through the spire into the manicured, sun-drenched courtyards of the Academy. Here, the children of the galaxy's elite gathered. They were the bright future, the inheritors of 1,000 years of peace. They were arrogant, brilliant, and bored. Ilara, a Valaxy student with Shim, murring violet scales and a crest of iridescent feathers, sat on a floating bench, laughing with her peers. "I told you they would fold," she said, tapping her data pad. "The variance is approved. We get to go inside the cage." Beside her, Joram, a Krell youth who had not yet earned his battle scars, snorted. My father says they are barely sentient anymore. He says they just sit around reading paper books and staring at screens. The warriors of Terra. He made a rude gesture with his lower, grasping limbs. It's a joke. The Synod keeps the ban in place to justify the defense budget. Oh, beware the humans, they might recite poetry at us. The group laughed, a cacophony of chirps, growls, and hums. They were standing at the edge of the great transparisteel observation deck that overlooked the Terran sector. From here, it looked like nothing special, just a section of the station that had been walled off with heavy blast doors and shimmering energy fields. There were no guards, only automated turrets that looked rusty and obsolete. The students had grown up hearing the stories. The humans, the destroyers, the species that had cracked their own planets before they ever achieved FTL. But looking at the quiet, dimly lit corridors visible through the sensors, they saw no monsters. They saw a retirement home for a species that had failed the evolutionary test. We're going to document it, Alara declared, standing up and smoothing her tunic. We're going to go in there, record their pathetic little lives, and broadcast it to the entire Academy. We'll prove that the human ban is the biggest lie in Federation history. We'll be famous, the ones who exposed the Synod's cowardice. What if they are dangerous? Asked a small, timid Omi student, rippling with uncertainty. Dangerous? Joram laughed, flexing his unscarred muscles. Look at the sensor readings, Talo. Their energy output is minimal. No weapon signatures, no shielding. They breathe a mix of nitrogen and oxygen that would make us dizzy, but that's it. They are soft. I could snap a human in half with one claw. Come on, let's go see the Boogamen. The journey to the airlock of the exclusion zone was filled with the banter of the uninitiated. They moved with the swagger of those who had never known true fear, only the academic concept of it. They carried advanced recording drones, spectroscopic scanners, and their own prejudices. When they arrived at the massive blast door, it did not groan open with ominous weight. It slid aside with a silent, well-oiled hiss. The air that rushed out to meet them was cool and dry, smelling faintly of old paper, coffee, and ozone. Alara led the way, her drones buzzing around her head like loyal insects. Recording started, she narrated for her future audience. We are entering the Terran habitat. As you can see, no guards, no alarms, just silence. They stepped into a wide corridor. The floors were carpeted in a synthetic gray material that muffled their footsteps. The walls were lined not with weapons or trophies, but with art. Strange, two-dimensional images frozen in frames. Landscapes of green hills, storms over gray oceans, faces of humans looking stoic or sorrowful. The lighting was yellow-white, simulating the star of their home world. It felt less like a prison and more like a library. Boring, Joram muttered, kicking at the carpet. Where are the war machines? Where are the trophies of their conquests? Maybe they hid them, Alara said, though she felt a twinge of disappointment. Let's find the central hub. The schematics show a gathering hall up ahead. They walked for 10 minutes without seeing a soul. The silence was heavy, pressing against their ears. It wasn't the silence of emptiness, it was the silence of concentration. Finally, they reached a set of double doors made of real wood, a rarity in the station. Joram pushed them open, and the students spilled into a vast, circular room. It was a lecture hall, or perhaps a council chamber, but it lacked the grandeur of the Synod. There were no floating maps, no gold, no obsidian, just rows of simple wooden desks and chairs, arranged in concentric circles around a central pit. And there, sitting in the chairs, were the humans. There were perhaps 50 of them. They came in various shades of pink, brown, and beige. They wore simple tunics of gray and blue. Some were reading physical books, others were writing on tablets. They did not look like monsters. They looked fragile. They possessed no claws, no natural armor, no fangs. Their eyes were small and forward-facing, binocular predators, yes, but they looked tired. At the center of the room, standing before a simple podium, was an older human. His hair was white, his face lined with the deep grooves of aging. He wore a tweed jacket with patches on the elbows. He was speaking softly to the assembly, but he stopped mid-sentence as the alien students burst in. 50 pairs of human eyes turned to look at the int. Rooters, there was no aggression in their gaze, no fear, only a mild, polite curiosity. "Can we help you?" the old human asked. His voice was raspy, speaking the trade tongue with a strange, archaic accent. Alara stepped forward, her drones hovering aggressively close to the humans. "We are the delegation from the Academy," she announced, puffing out her chest. "We have a variance from the High Synod to inspect this sector. We are here to document the truth of the human ban." The old man took off his glasses and wiped them on his shirt. "The truth," he repeated, testing the word. "And what truth do you expect to find, young one?" "That you are obsolete," Joram interrupted, stepping past Alara. He towered over the seated humans. "That the ban is a joke. Look at you. You are frail. You have no weapons. You sit here in the dark reading fairy tales while the galaxy moves on without you. We are here to show the galaxy that there is nothing to fear." A few of the younger humans in the back exchanged glances. One of them, a woman with dark hair, almost smiled, but she suppressed it quickly. The old man placed his glasses back on his nose. "I see," he said. "You are students of history, then, or perhaps xenopsychology." "We are students of reality," Alara said sharply. "We know the stories, the Scourge of Saul, the Planet Breakers. But those are just myths, aren't they? You never did those things, or if you did, you lost the ability to fight long ago. You are harmless." The old man sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. He stepped down from the podium and walked slowly toward Alara. He was head and shoulders shorter than her, yet she felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to step back. She held her ground. "My name is Professor Vance," the human said, "and you are partially correct. We are harmless now." He gestured around the room. "We are scholars, engineers, artists. We live our lives. We do not seek conflict." "Because you can't," Joram sneered. "If I challenged you to a duel right now, you would die. Your biology is weak." Vance looked at Joram, his eyes a pale, watery blue. "Yes," he agreed. "If you struck me, I would break. I am old. But you mistake physical durability for power, and you mistake the absence of violence for the inability to commit it." "Prove it," Alara challenged, her recording drones zooming in on Vance's face. "Show us why we should be afraid. Show us why the High Synod trembles at the name Terra. Because right now, all I see are gardeners." Vance looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the other humans. They gave him barely perceptible nods. He turned back to the students. "You wish to see the archives?" he asked softly. "Not the sanitized public records the Synod lets you see. The internal archives, our memories." "Yes," Alara said. "Show us everything." "Very well," Vance said. "Follow me." He led them out of the hall and deeper into the habitat. They passed rooms that looked like workshops, filled with disassembled machinery that looked far too advanced for gardeners. But the students were too busy gloating to notice the flux capacitors or the antimatter containment units sitting on the workbenches. They reached a heavy steel door at the end of a long, unlit corridor. Vance placed his hand on a scanner. The door groaned, a sound of heavy, dense metal moving against gravity. Inside was a room of total darkness, save for a single console in the center. "The history you know is a summary," Vance said, his voice echoing in the dark. "It says we fought a war, we were too violent, and we were contained. It does not show you the nature of the war. It does not show you what we are capable of when we stop being gardeners." He pressed a button. The room flooded with holographic light, but it was not the clean, blue light of the Federation maps. It was jagged, red, and visceral. "These are not simulations," Vance warned. "These are raw sensory recordings from the front lines of the Titan conflict, the war we fought against ourselves before we met you." The first image materialized. It was a planet viewed from orbit, but the surface was not a recognizable terrain. It was a burning ember. The students watched in confusion. "A volcanic world?" Alara asked. "No," Vance said. "That was Earth, our cradle. We burned it." The view zoomed in. The students gasped. The fire wasn't magma, it was cities. Continents of steel and glass were melting under a bombardment of kinetic rods dropped from orbit. The scale of the destruction was industrial. It wasn't a battle, it was an erasure. "Why," Joram whispered, his arrogance faltering, "why destroy your own nest?" "Ideology," Vance answered. "We disagreed on the definition of freedom, so we weaponized gravity." The scene shifted. Now it was a ground-level view, chaos, mud, blood, but not the honorable combat of the Krell where warriors dueled for status. This was a meat grinder. The students saw humans, thousands of them, char, jing into fire that vaporized them instantly. They saw soldiers using their own bodies to smother grenades. They saw a medic frantically trying to stuff intestines back into a screaming man, only to be blown apart by a sniper. "This is chaotic," Alara said, feeling bile rise in her throat. "There is no strategy, just death." "Look closer," Vance said. The image froze. Vance highlighted a section of the battlefield. "This unit here, they are surrounded, outnumbered 20 to 1. By Federation standards, they should surrender. It is the logical choice to preserve genetic diversity. Watch. The video played. The surrounded humans didn't surrender. They didn't flee. They affixed bayonets, primitive blades, to their rifles. They laughed. They screamed. And they charged into the teeth of the enemy. They died, every single one of them, but they took 3 times their number with them. They fought with a savagery that defied biological self-preservation. "We do not fight for survival alone," Vance said quietly. "We fight for spite. We fight because we refuse to let the universe tell us when to die." The images cycled faster now. The students saw the glassing of Mars. They saw the void jumpers, humans who strapped engines to their backs and jumped between ships in hard vacuum with no tethers, cutting through hulls with plasma torches. They saw the psych warfare divisions, broadcasting screams that drove enemy populaces to madness. But then the images changed. They showed the first contact war, the war the Valaxi and Krell thought they had won easily. "This is the Battle of Sector 7, Joram said, pointing at a fleet of Krell ships destroying human frigates. "We crushed you here." "Did you?" Vance asked. "Look at the telemetry." The hologram zoomed in on the human ships. They were burning, venting atmosphere, but they weren't retreating. They were accelerating. "Ramming speed," Alara whispered, horrified. The burning human ships slammed into the pristine Krell dreadnoughts. They didn't use weapons. They used their mass. They turned their dying vessels into bullets. The Krell fleet fell into disarray, their formation broken by an enemy that treated suicide as a tactical maneuver. "We lost the war," Vance said, "because we chose to stop. We realized that if we continued, we would not just defeat you, we would exterminate you, and in doing so, we would lose the last fragment of our humanity." The room fell silent. The holographic carnage faded, leaving the students standing in the dark with the old man. "You ridiculed the ban," Vance said, his voice devoid of anger. "You thought we were locked in here because we are weak. No, children, we are locked in here because we are the only species in the galaxy that has mastered the science of extinction. We realized that we are a danger to existence itself, so we put ourselves in a cage. We banned ourselves. The Synod didn't force us. We asked for it." Alara stared at him. The frail old man suddenly looked very different. She saw the predator in his forward-facing eyes. She saw the calculator behind the spectacles. You protect us from yourselves," she stammered. "Mostly," Vance said. He walked over to the console and keyed in a new sequence. "But there is another reason we stay in the cage. A reason the High Synod knows but refuses to teach you." "What reason?" Joram asked, his voice trembling. "Because we are waiting," Vance said. A new image appeared. It was not a war photo. It was a star chart. But it was looking outward, away from the galactic center, into the dark void between galaxies. "For what?" "For them," Vance pointed to a cluster of dead stars on the rim. The image magnified. It showed a shape. Massive, organic, a bioship the size of a moon, and behind it millions more. "The swarm," Vance said. "The Vorid, they eat galaxies. They consumed the Andromeda galaxy 3 million years ago. They have been drifting through the void, sleeping, but they are waking up. We heard their signal 50 years ago. The Synod ignored us. They called it static, but we know static doesn't scream." Alara felt her knees give way. She sat on the floor, staring at the nightmare armada on the screen. "If this is true, why hasn't the Synod mobilized?" "Because they are afraid," Vance said. "They prefer to believe in peace. They prefer to believe that diplomacy solves all. They cannot comprehend an enemy that does not want land or resources or submission. An enemy that only wants biomass. To the Synod, the Vorid are a myth. To us, they are the inevitable." The lights in the room suddenly flashed red. A siren, deep and resonant, began to wail throughout the station. It wasn't the fire alarm. It was the general quarters alarm, the one that had not sounded in 400 years. "It seems," Vance said, checking a wrist monitor that had suddenly come to life with scrolling tactical data, "that the waiting is over." The floor beneath them shuddered. A massive impact rocked the Peck station. "We are under attack," Joram screamed, panic seizing his reptilian brain. "The shields, the fleet." "The fleet is ceremonial," Vance said calmly. He tapped a command on his wrist. The walls of the room began to shift. Panels slid away, revealing racks of equipment, not books, not gardening tools. Heavy kinetic armor, pulse rifles, gravity hammers. "The Synod's fleet will last about 15 minutes against the Vorid vanguard," Vance said, stripping off his tweed jacket. Underneath, he wore a black body glove with interface ports along the spine. He picked up a chest plate, dull gray, scarred, utilitarian, and strapped it on. The transformation was instant. The kindly professor vanished. The soldier appeared. "What are you doing?" Alara cried, clutching her datapad. "We are activating the protocols," Vance said. He tossed a heavy helmet to a younger human who had just run into the room. "The ban is lifted." Vance turned to the students. "You wanted to see the humans of the war photos? You wanted to see the monsters?" He picked up a rifle that looked heavy enough to punch a hole through a tank. "Stay behind us and cover your ears." The group of humans moved with a terrifying synchronization. There were no shouts, no hesitation. They flowed out of the archive room and into the corridors of the habitat. The students ran after them, terrified of being left alone. As they emerged into the main concourse of the Apex station, chaos reigned. The containment walls of the exclusion zone had retracted. The station was breached. Through the viewports, Alara saw the horror. Great fleshy tendrils were latched onto the station's hull. Creatures, chitinous, multi-limbed horrors were pouring through breaches in the hull. The station's security forces, the elite Galaxy Guard and the Krell warriors, were firing energy weapons. The blue bolts splashed harmlessly against the organic shields of the Vorid invaders. The aliens were being slaughtered. General Krog was there, roaring, firing a plasma cannon, but a Vorid warrior, twice his size, lunged at him. Krog braced for death. A crack of thunder split the air. The Vorid warrior's head exploded in a mist of green ichor. Krog blinked, looking around. Vance stepped over the debris, his rifle smoking. "Kinetic impact," he shouted over the din. "Energy shields disperse plasma. You need mass to break the chitin. Use solid rounds." "We don't have solid rounds," Krog roared. "We phased them out centuries ago." "We didn't," Vance said. Behind Vance, the gardeners poured into the hall. They formed a firing line. It was a maneuver from the Napoleonic era, adapted for stellar warfare. "Suppressing fire," Vance ordered. The roar was deafening. The human weapons didn't pew or hum. They banged. They slammed slugs of tungsten and depleted uranium at hypersonic speeds. The Vorid line disintegrated. The organic armor that shrugged off lasers shattered under the brutal, primitive physics of a flying rock. Alara and the students huddled behind an overturned transport cart, watching in awe. The humans were not fighting with the elegance of the Galaxy or the honor of the Krell. They were fighting with efficiency. They used grenades to clear corners. They used combat knives in close quarters, stabbing at joints and eyes. They moved like a fluid, a single organism of violence. "They are monsters," Joram whispered, but there was no mockery in his voice now, only reverence. "They are the most beautiful monsters I have ever seen." Vance moved to the center of the hall, tapping his comms. "Command, this is Unit Alpha. Secure the breach at Sector 4. Unit Beta, move to the reactor core. If the Vorid take the power, we're dead. Unit Gamma, release the drones." Drones, Alara watched as the humans deployed small, spherical objects. They didn't scan or record. They flew into the swarm of enemies and detonated. Shrapnel, simple, brutal shrapnel. The tide of the battle turned. The Vorid, confused by this new enemy that didn't fight by the galactic rules of energy dampening, faltered. They were biological organisms, and they learned fear. The humans were pushing them back, meter by bloody meter. Vance approached the stunned High Counselor Vitara, who was cowering behind her guards. "Counselor," Vance said, his voice amplified by his helmet. "The station is compromised. You need to evacuate the civilians to the inner ring." "You," Vitara stammered, looking at the carnage, at the dead Vorid piled high. "You broke the ban. You have weapons." "We never stopped having weapons," Vance said. "We just stopped using them on you. Now move." The authority in his voice was absolute. The High Counselor obeyed. For 3 hours, the battle raged. The students, initially paralyzed, found themselves acting as runners, carrying ammo clips, heavy physical things to the human lines. They saw the humans die. They saw a woman, the one who had suppressed a smile earlier, take a spike through the chest. She didn't SCR. She pulled the pin on a grenade and hugged her killer. It was the war photos come to life. The self-sacrifice, the madness. Finally, the immediate wave was repelled. The Vorid bioship detached from the station, sensing that the prey was biting back too hard. It retreated to the edge of the sensor range to regroup with the main fleet that was warping in. Silence returned to the Grand Concourse. But it was a heavy, smoky silence. The air smelled of cordite and alien blood. Vance removed his helmet. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead. He looked exhausted. He looked every one of his years. General Krog limped over. He looked at the human weapons, then at his own high-tech, useless plasma cannon. He dropped his weapon. "You knew they were coming," Krog said. "Yes," Vance replied. "And you stayed in the cage." "We used the cage to build," Vance said. "While you perfected your art and your diplomacy, we built the hammer." "The hammer?" Alara asked, stepping forward. Her uniform was stained with green blood. She felt different, older. Vance gestured to the viewports. "Look." The students and the counselors looked out. The Terran exclusion zone, the habitat they had mocked, was breaking apart. The outer shell was shedding. The fake gardens, the libraries, the false walls were drifting away. Underneath the camouflage was not a habitat. It was a ship. A dreadnought of impossible size, built from the very station's structure itself over centuries of secret labor. It was ugly, blocky, and covered in railguns the size of skyscrapers. It didn't glow with elegant energy. It radiated the cold menace of dark iron. "The UNS Damocles," Vance said. "We didn't just ban ourselves, we turned our prison into a fortress." The comms crackled. "Professor, Admiral Vance, the Damocles is hot. Main reactors are at 110%. The fleet is ready to deploy." "Fleet," Vitara whispered. From the shadow of the Damocles, hundreds of smaller human warships emerged. They had been docked inside the structure, hidden in the blind spots of the station's sensors. "We are not just the survivors of the past," Vance said, addressing the stunned aliens. "We are the vanguard of the future. The Vorid are here to eat. We are here to choke them." He turned to Alara, the student who had wanted to expose the humans as weak. "You have your story, student," Vance said gently. "You have your footage. You saw the war photos. Now you see the war." Alara looked at her datapad. She looked at the recording of the human soldier tackling the Vorid. She looked at the Damocles drifting out to meet the nightmare swarm. "It wasn't a ban," she whispered, the realization hitting her with the force of a kinetic round. "It was a cocoon." Vance nodded. He put his hand on her shoulder. "Go, tell the galaxy, tell them the humans are loose, and tell them we are on their side, for now." Vance turned and walked toward the airlock that would take him to his ship. The other humans followed, their boots thudding in unison. They didn't look back. They didn't ask for thanks. They marched toward the darkness because that was where they lived. The students stood in the ruin of the Apex station, watching the human fleet burn its engines. The light of the drive plumes was blinding, a new star born of chemical fire and defiance. "What do we do now?" Joram asked, his voice small. Alara watched the Damocles fire its main gun. A beam of solid tungsten, accelerated to a fraction of light speed, slammed into the distant Vorid bioship. The impact was silent in the void, but the flash lit up the entire system. "We watch," Alara said, activating her transmitter to broadcast the feed to the entire Federation. "We watch the monsters save us." She looked at the title of her report on the screen, "The Human Ban, an Analysis of Obsolescence." She deleted it. Her fingers trembled as she typed a new title, one that would be read on 1,000 worlds within the hour, sparking fear, awe, and hope in equal measure. "The Keepers of the Gate, Why We Must Never Forget the War Photos." Outside, the silence of the void was broken by the silent roar of humanity going to war. And for the first time in centuries, the galaxy was not safe, but it was alive. And the students, the children of the long peace, finally understood the price of their tranquility. They stood in the wreckage, no longer ridiculing the silence, but praying that the noise of the humans would never stop. The philosophical weight of the moment settled on Alara. She realized that civilization was a thin veneer over the chaos of the universe, and the humans were the ones who had volunteered to stand in the mud so the rest of them could keep their boots clean. She zoomed her camera in on the hull of the Damocles. Painted in rough, white letters on the gray steel was an ancient phrase she didn't recognize, but whose meaning was now perfectly clear. "Si vis pacem, para bellum." If you want peace, prepare for war. Alara lowered the camera. Lesson was over. The war had begun. And the humans were exactly where they belonged, between the monsters and the innocent. The view from the observation deck became a panorama of violence. The human fleet did not dance, it brawled. Ships took hits, vented atmosphere, and kept firing. It was terrifyingly inspiring. The Valaxy High Counselor stood beside Alara, her mandibles trembling. "We judged them," Vitara whispered. "We judged them for their past, and all the while they were preparing to save our future." "They didn't do it for us," Alara said, a sudden insight clarifying her thoughts. "They did it because they hate the dark, they hate the silence." She looked at the image of Vance on her screen, frozen from the archives, a young man in a muddy trench, holding a flag, surrounded by death, yet smiling with a grim determination. Then she looked at the Damocles. "They are the same," she said. "The gardener and the soldier, they are the same man." The battle would last for weeks. The war would last for years. But in that moment, as the first human salvo broke the back of the invader, the galaxy changed. The ridicule died. The fear remained, but it was a new kind of fear. It was the fear of the sheep realizing the wolf was sleeping in the barn and thanking the stars he was. Alara hit send on her broadcast. "This is Alara of the Valaxy," she spoke into the feed, her voice strong, echoing the strength she had just witnessed. "Reporting from the apex, the human ban is lifted. God help the enemy." The screen faded to black, leaving only the afterimage of the human fleet burning against the cold, indifferent stars. The story of the ridicule was over. The story of the legend had begun.